A year and a half ago, I asked myself a question.
Who was what at the end of the thing?
And not only did I find an answer, I found all of the answers.
One is that they were both human. Two is that Childs is actually the thing and Mac is human. Three is that Mac is the thing and Childs is still human. And four is that they are both now the thing.
But for the last year, a different question has continued to bother me. What if I was wrong?
You couldn't ever possibly figure out.
I mean, who really knows other than John Carpenter?
I guess you could call it an ambiguous ending.
Me. I know.
So I looked into everything that has to deal with the thing, from before the thing, during the thing, and after the thing, and I now know the truth.
I was right and I was wrong at the same time.
It's not that I had the wrong answer, it's that I had the wrong question.
If I was an imitation, a perfect imitation, how would you know if it was really me?
But for you to fully understand what I mean, we have to start at the very beginning and go through my entire journey through everything that is the thing.
Everything clicks, it all makes sense.
So we can know how the thing works, why it does what it does, answer the question once and for all of who is the thing at the end of the thing, and finally see the bigger picture that is at the center of every single piece of this story.
It's always been a misdirection. But I figured it out.
Which is why you need to just fully expect spoilers for everything. And again, if you're watching this and you haven't at least seen the 82 version by John Carpenter, I don't know why you're here, but I'm glad that you are. Thanks for watching. And since you are here, look, new merch. It's all centered around the thing. We got a McCready thing, a Child's thing, and even a Poulter thing. It's me! And if you look really close, it's even signed by the artist Logan Bruno, who I had design all of this for you. His Instagram's linked down in the description so you can go and check out the rest of his incredible work, but all of this is just so cool, and even better, it's all on sale for the next 30 days. Seriously, thank you all for checking all of it out, and with that, we can go back to the very beginning of this entire story in 1936. You heard me right, 1936, before John Carpenter was ever born, before this version of the thing was ever a thing, John W. Campbell wrote a story called Imitation, or at least that's what he wanted to call it, but instead the editor of Wonder Stories, Mort Weisinger, said that it needed to be called this: Brain Stealers of Mars. Now I know what you're thinking, that doesn't sound very scary, and that's because this was not meant to be a scary story. This was meant to be a sci-fi thriller that Campbell was writing in place of Stanley G. Weinbaum, who was one of the main writers for Wonder Stories but had died a year before. So without him, Mort Weisinger called up John W. Campbell to see if he could write a story in the same likeness as Weinbaum. To which he said yes, because he's only 26 at this point and had already had some success by writing under his pseudonym Don A. Stewart, but was trying to break out of the low-paying stories that he was currently writing to make some more money and really make this a full-time thing. So by spring of 1936, he presents Imitation to Wonder Stories, and then it was published in December of that year as Brain Stealers of Mars, where in the story our main characters Penton and Blake set off an atomic explosion during an experiment here on Earth, and they decide to leave to go to Mars, where they find a bunch of odd trees, but weirder still is there's a bunch of them that look really similar to Japanese maple trees. Only it's not Japanese maple trees, as the trees then change into duplicates of Penton and Blake and completely surround them. But they don't just look like them, they are perfect imitations of them, including their voice, their personalities, and even their memories. So in the midst of trying to figure out what to do with all of these perfect imitations of themselves, Penton decides he'll just shoot one of them, see what happens. It begins to morph even more as then the actual natives of Mars, who are like these centaur-looking creatures, come up and begin to explain telepathically to them what is going on. And they tell them that these shapeshifters are called the Thushul, and they have the power to transform perfectly into any other living form, which explains why they were able to go from something like a tree over to perfect versions of Penton and Blake, which causes Penton to ask the question, how do you, as the Martians, tell the difference between the imitations and the real thing? The Martians answered the question by saying it used to bother them that they couldn't tell the difference. But if an imitation is so perfect that you can't tell the difference, What's the difference? Now, this is very concerning to Penton and Blake. Just because the Martians are fine with it doesn't mean that they are, and they understand that if either them or any other explorer comes to Mars and brings one of these to the Earth, that'll be the end of everyone as they know it, everything as they know it. Because it doesn't matter where the Thushal is, it will be able to survive. They're infinitely adaptable creatures. If you were to put them on a desert island, they would be able to turn into a fish and swim to wherever they wanted, either that or taking over the entire ocean. Or if you were to put them into a jail cell somewhere, they could turn into anything and slither down a drain and escape. Even in a desert, they would just be able to turn into a cactus and be completely fine. Penton realizes all of this and knows that there is only one solution to what they need to do right now to save the entire human race, and that is leave immediately. But the question they have is, how do they know that they are both still human and the others are the Thushal? Now you can see where this entire thing could take a very scary route, but instead, since John W. Campbell was writing in the place of Weinenbaum, he wraps everything up in a very Weinenbaum fashion of they figure out a very ingenious plan to tell the difference between them. They all get on the ship, they fly away, Earth is saved, yay, everything works out great. Now, it should be very clear at this point that the whole idea of the Thushal continued on into what we now know as Who Goes There, which later inspired The Thing from Another World and then The Thing. But it didn't happen all of a sudden because John W. Campbell needed to pay his bills, so he continued writing for Wonder Stories in Weinbaum's fashion, but he still wanted to break into some higher paying writing jobs, so he called up Argosy in 1937 to see if they would hire him to write some more sci-fi stories. Now, he'd already tried in 1935 to get Argosy to take on his story Frozen Hell, but they said no. But now in 1937, when John W. Campbell calls up Jack Byrne, who is the editor of Argosy, he does like the idea of the Thushal, and Campbell asked him if he would like it to be written in a scarier tone and placed on Earth instead of Mars. He says yes, but he doesn't like the idea of just being anywhere on Earth because he feels like if it's in a city, there's going to be too many people, too much stuff going on. It's going to feel very impersonal. So Campbell comes up with the idea that it should be placed in Antarctica. This thing would be found frozen in the ice, and you know the rest of the story. And that story's name is Frozen Hell. Now I know what you're thinking. That's not right. The story's called Who Goes There? And he had already tried to submit the story that he had written called Frozen Hell in 1935 to this same company, and it was rejected. That story was later published under a different name in 1951 called The Moon is Hell. This was rejected by Argosy because they said it didn't have any characters. Jack Byrne said no. He said that the story was good, the writing was good, but there was no major characters. Everybody felt like a minor character, and that was a problem because when stuff's happening to them, you don't really care. You're not rooting for them. So through this, Campbell went through and rewrote the entire story to give us Who Goes There, the story we all know and love, and that led to all of these other things that we know and love. Now, this original version was lost for over 60 years until Alec Navala Lee went out and was writing a book about all of the great science fiction writers during Campbell's time and stumbled across the original draft that we can now read today like it had been unearthed and unleashed onto the world after being lost for all of this time, which just sounds so perfect, almost as if John W. Campbell loved this story so much, he set all of this up on purpose. That, of course, is just speculation, but you can read the original version now called Frozen Hell by John W. Campbell Jr. and Alec Navala Lee went in here and wrote the preface, and he gives how he found it, where he found it over in the Harvard Library, where John W. Campbell had donated a couple of his original drafts and scripts into their library for science fiction stuff. And then it just sat there in a box for 60 years until he found it. It's so cool! But it's through his discovery that we can now read the original version of this beloved story to see where it started, why it was rejected, get a little bit more info, because there are almost 3 full chapters that were cut from the story we know as Who Goes There. This is just me nerding out over all of this. We can say it's not lost anymore, and we can get into the story itself to figure out why it was rejected and how it changed into what we now know and love. Now, I know all of this is a lot because it took me way longer than what I'll admit to write all of these names up here, but you should recognize like Benning, Blair, Clark, Dr. Copper, Gary, McCready, and Norris. But there were 37 total characters in Who Goes There and Frozen Hell, with 17 of them being named in Who Goes There and 20 of them being named in Frozen Hell. But instead of explaining to you who all of these people are, what their jobs are, what they're doing in the story, we're going to walk through both of them at the same time and fill this in as we go. And since this comic book contains the one and only true adaptation of Who Goes There, I'll cover it at the same time because it's literally just Who Goes There in comic form. Now, the beginning of Who Goes There is different from Frozen Hell because Frozen Hell gives the account of them going and finding the thing, versus in Who Goes There, it is McCready recounting what happened when they went to the rest of the crew. And what is so neat about this comic book is even though they didn't know Frozen Hell was a thing during this time, they still went through and showed them finding it instead of McCready just retelling what happened. So this comic book is not only the one true adaptation of Who Goes There, it very closely lines up with Frozen Hell, even though nobody knew that was a thing then. Our story begins October 2nd of 1939, where 37 different scientists and technicians are down in Antarctica right above the southern magnetic pole of the Earth so they can study all of the different natural phenomenon that happen in and around it. Which is why their main base is called Big Magnet, and not too far away they picked up on another strange magnetic signal that is throwing everything they have off, so they have traveled and set up a secondary base called Secondary Magnet so they can figure out exactly what is giving off this strange yet powerful magnetic signal that is messing with all of their instruments. And it's down here at Secondary Magnetic that we have Barclay, McCready, Norris, and Vane, who believe they have finally pinpointed where this strange signal is coming from about a half a mile away. And it's the evening before they head to figure out exactly what is giving off this signal that they discuss what they think it might be. And most of them think it is probably just some sort of odd meteorite, but for as strong as this magnetic signal is, they're also thinking it must not be very deep underneath all of the ice, to the point that they might actually be able to reach it by digging just a little bit. And there are these little moments that pop up before anything goes wrong that are so incredible and telling that something is going to go wrong, because Barclay here hates digging. He doesn't want to dig anymore. He gets upset just at the mention that they might have to dig. And Norris says, "You can always hope that it's buried good and deep so we can't possibly dig it out." And it's just after this that Barclay continues to talk about his dislike of using these Bronze Age tools because of how much he hates digging with the ice axes. But his complaints don't stop there, as McCready then chimes in to talk about how he's going to make dinner that evening, and then in the morning they can have cocoa and oatmeal. Of which Barclay wonders aloud of, didn't they have that yesterday, or was it oatmeal and cocoa today and then cocoa and oatmeal yesterday? But McCready assures him that it was oatmeal and cocoa today, so tomorrow they will have cocoa and oatmeal. I know what you're thinking. Well, that doesn't matter. Those are the same thing. If they're so similar that you can't tell the difference, what's the difference? So the next morning after their cocoa and oatmeal, they set off, and you'll notice that McCready here is not a pilot, but instead is a meteorologist. And it's on the way that he notices some very odd weather patterns, that the temperature has dropped to -58. I can't even imagine, but everything is dead calm outside. And so with his knowledge of the weather, he believes that they need to start digging when they make it to the site. And he does this throughout the rest of the story by updating everybody about the really weird weather patterns and how this is not natural at all. Something strange is going on here. Something that they probably just need to stay away from. But they don't. Instead, they continue to follow this magnetic field that is here until the point that they find exactly where it is, and they're able to walk around and track and measure everything out and find out exactly how big whatever this thing is in the ice, or at least a good enough guess, as they then realize they have to start digging, which Barclay, of course, hates. Now, from my understanding of how all of this reads, it's like they had the thing they're looking for down in the ice over here, and they started digging over here with a sloping tunnel down to it to the point that they're close enough, and Barclay suggests that they could use a torch and melt the ice a little bit to make basically a clear window to see if there's anything down there. And everyone thinks that's a great idea. MacReady kind of chops up one little spot to make it as flat as can be because, well, they've been chopping their way into the ice, and Barr walks over. He uses the torch. He makes him a little circular window by melting the ice until it's good and clear. And he freaks out and leaves and says, I don't know what I saw down there, but I will let somebody else deal with that. Let me know when you figure it out. Of course, MacReady, Norris, and Vane don't know what he's talking about, and they're wondering what is going on with Barclay, but he just tells them that it's about 5 feet down. You guys can dig. I'm not going to do any more with this. So Barclay leaves, Norris follows him, MacReady and Vane go down into the pit to see what in the world Barclay saw, and it's here that Vane then calls out to Norris to say that we have found the magnet that is down here because all he can see is this giant metal thing in the ice. But when Barclay hears that, he says, no, that's not what I saw. Tell them to keep digging. Then, in all of the excitement, Norris leaves Barclay to head deeper into the pit to see what MacReady and Vane have found, as MacReady is digging and doing his hardest to get down there to see what all of this is. He is swinging his ice axe through the ice until it hits something else. MacReady cries out because he realizes what has just happened, but Norris is just now running up, doesn't understand, but as he's looking, both Vane and MacReady are in front of him. He can't see what they see, but up above them, through the tunnel they have made, is this giant metal mass in the ice. But it's as Norris is looking up that Vane begins to step back, and he looks down, and right between MacReady's legs, he can see a head sticking out of the ice that has been split open by the axe. As he then calls up to Barclay to say, Bar, if what you saw had blue hair like earthworms and 3 red eyes, it's here. So after this insane discovery, they head back to report everything to Gary, who's in charge of all of this, but since he is not formally introduced here, we'll come back to him. Instead, we do have Blair, who's the biologist, Dr. Copper, who is a doctor, Van Wall, who is the chief pilot, and Macy, who is only mentioned here as being the pilot that flew them out there so he can fly back, and that's it for Macy. Good, you did it, buddy. Good job. But that's probably why he was cut out of the story, since there's literally no point. Like, one line? Macy, you're in it for one line, right? Why are you here? Correction, 2 lines. But it's the evening that the amazing Macy drops all of the other important characters off at Secondary Magnet, that they begin talking, and Dr. Copper asks the question, if now is the time to start coming up with theories about what is in the ice. It's MacReady that says not yet, because all we know is this ship is about 50 feet wide and from the magnetic readings around 250 feet long with no wings. And from that, what they know is this is unlike any flying object that they have ever even considered in their lives, and either it landed where it did before Antarctica froze over, or it was so hot when it crashed that it melted its way down into the ice. Either way, it's definitely been here for a very long time, and this is when Blair chimes in to ask about this thing that they found in the ice, but McCready doesn't really have any answers. They didn't dig it up any farther. They left it there for him to look at, assuming that it's been in the ice this long, surely it will be okay for another day or two. But because it's in the ice, everything around it is very blurred, so they can't even tell if it's man-like. All they know is the face of it is not human. Blair doesn't know what they mean as they begin to talk about its disposition. Blair's just like, well, just tell me what you're talking about. Barclay says, you can just look at it tomorrow. Be way better if you did, because we don't even want to describe what it is. But through Blair's consistent questioning, McCready begins to explain his thoughts about the look that is on this thing's face. It isn't remotely human. I'd say the thing was trapped and it was mad. Not crazy, though any human to have as much distilled essence of hatred in his eyes would have to be crazy. I think it was just angry. And he follows this up by saying that they believe that the front of the ship was jammed up against a rock and had crumbled the front end in, telling them that this ship of whatever kind must have been going extremely fast to have that happen. And then, even though McCready said it wasn't time for theories, he then gives his theory that this ship at some point was circling around the magnetic pole down there and it messed up all of the instruments within the ship, which is what caused it to crash the way that it did. But even with all of his theories and everything else that he explains to the rest of the crew and the other guys about what he thinks has happened here, he still goes back to this insane being and the look that was on its face. And he tells them it's enough. We're turning in for the night and we can go and look at the thing in the pit and deal with it tomorrow. So the next day when they make it to the pit, Blair and Copper walk down the tunnel to see this thing's head sticking out of the ground, which causes both of them to stop as Blair then decides to take a couple of pictures. Copper tries to see what else is down there, and McCready walks up to say, "That's it. Now we get to dig it out." Now it's as they're standing here kind of in shock looking at this being sticking out of the ice that Copper just flat out says, "I don't want to dig the thing out. No thanks." But regardless of how Copper feels about it, he understands that this find is very important. And the problem is Blair begins to talk about it from a biological standpoint and how this being is very clearly older than mankind. But what's so strange is on its arm, it seemed like it had begun to grow fur out of it right before it froze. Copper just says all of that is very unpleasant, and he hopes that once they get this thing out and inspect the ship, that there aren't any more. And McCready says he's pretty sure that there are, because Vane has estimated that the ship would need at least 10 of them to function, but it could carry at least 300 of them. With that, Copper just asks, how much do you think that it weighs? And it's hard to tell here in the ice, but it's Blair, the biologist, of course, that says probably about 85 pounds, about the size of a husky. This will be very important later in the story. That's why I had to mention it here, because it's going to come back up. What Copper doesn't want to come up out of the ice right now is this thing. As he then asks McCready again, are you sure? Are you sure you want this thing out of here? They all know the answer, that they need to get this thing out of the ice, but they also agree they would all work much better as long as they just sort of cover it up with a little tarp so they don't have to look at it any more than what they need to. But what they do need to look at much more is the metal that is here on the ship, because they need to find out exactly what it is to know if they can cut into it, if they can pry it open, deal with it, Anything that can tell them about the metal that is on the ship is going to help them in their investigation of it. Problem is, they still haven't figured that part out, but they do eventually dig the thing out of the ice, and it's like this 5x3 block of ice that they then drag all the way out of the tunnel, dig a little deeper, and make it to a door that is on the ship. But the problem is, it is so frozen shut with all of the mechanisms that are in there that the only option they have to open it is to blow it off the hinges. Okay, so maybe that's not the right wording because they're not going to use dynamite. Instead, they're going to use thermite. The same stuff that was used in John Carpenter's version of the film, which a bunch of people said it couldn't have been thermite. There was a giant explosion. Thermite doesn't do that. Thermite would melt everything down. The issue they would have here, though, is because it is a tunnel that they have dug into the ice, there would be a lot of steam very fast in an enclosed space that would then blow stuff out of the tunnel, which is why they have to go far, far away and be safe when they set it off, which is exactly what they do. As Barclay is the one to close the knife switch, setting off everything with a thermite, which then explodes into steam, melting all of the ice almost instantaneously, causing a big puff of steam out of the tunnel. After that happens, everybody gets up, begins to walk, when they start to see something glowing super bright in the ice. The others started forward slowly, started and stopped. The glare building up again became more brilliant. Another puff of steam belched up from the pit into the Antarctic twilight. The fierce light below was growing stronger still. The metal of the ship had a reaction with the thermite, causing it to completely turn into this giant glowing bulb within the ice and then explode with all of the heat, sending 50-foot blocks of ice all throughout the area. Everybody runs and scatters and is trying to find safety. They don't know where to go, but everything to do with the ship is completely gone and melted. There is nothing left. But after this, everyone's asking questions, and it's MacReady that explains that not only did the ship have this reaction, but after it heated up, we then hit the fuel supply of the ship, causing it to explode with whatever strange energy that it had built up from the magnetic pole. This big of an explosion messed up all of their equipment, so they can't even signal back to Big Magnet to let them know what happened, but luckily there was enough of them. They're all very capable, and they do still have this thing in the block of ice that they can carry back with them to secondary magnet, call Big Magnet, and get there for where they can have the rest of the 37 people look and figure out what is this thing. Now we have a bit of a difference here between Frozen Hell and Who Goes There, because in Who Goes There, we have MacReady recounting all of this to the rest of the crew to explain to them how they found the thing and how they got it back. And when the explosion happened, they were looking into it, which caused a bunch of them to go blind. And there is this one line here that is odd. Somehow in the blinding inferno, we could see great hunch things, black bulks. They shed even the furious incandescent of the magnesium for a time. But he continues on by saying those must have been the engines we knew, secrets going in blazing glory, secrets that might have given man the planets. The way it was interpreted in the comic is that these hulking masses are other things within the ship that they were seeing. But whether it was the engines or if it was other things within the ship that they had seen, that they believed were already there because they know that it should have taken around 10 to at least run the entire ship, one still survived. And they have it there with them. But regardless if it was other things that were there in the ship or if it was just the engines, it doesn't matter because all of it is now gone and exploded and is lost forever. But one thing still survived. Now for them, that is really bad news, but they don't know that yet. Right now, all they're doing is transporting it back to Big Magnet. And through this, we find out that on their way back, Blair was the only one actually riding next to the thing. This here is important and we'll come back up shortly, but first they need to figure out exactly where Blair, who is the biologist and the one going to study this thing, wants this thing to be taken. And right now, he's not exactly sure. All he knows is that he can't use violent methods to get it out of the ice, but he needs to melt the ice off of it, and it could take up to 36 hours. But Blair tries to assure everybody that this thing is no more dangerous than the frozen seals that are out there, but this thing is dead and it is natural, which McCready quickly cuts him off saying, no, it's not. This thing is not natural. It's not natural to this planet, and he can guarantee that until this entire being is pickled in formaldehyde, it's going to be extremely unpopular with everyone there in Big Magnet. And it's at this time that finally Bossman Gary, or Commander Gary, walks up and begins to ask questions as he gets filled in by McCready and Norris, and Blair tries to give his part into it, and they find out that Conet is the one that is going to be the watchman that evening. And they all agree very quickly that Conet is going to be very upset since his cosmic ray room that he is in is quite small. Now it's here that we have some of the crew explaining to some of the other people what they found, what happened, the explosion, everything in between. We have people like Dutton, who is such a small part that he was replaced for the majority of his lines throughout the majority of the story for Norris. But this didn't just happen to Dutton, it also happened to Powell, who plays a fairly big part as the senior meteorologist to McCready, who is under him. His character was completely replaced by other people here, mainly Norris, who is lifted up to be one of the main characters throughout every rendition of this story. And you can see just how much Powell was replaced by Norris, because at the end of the third chapter in Frozen Hell, right before it catches up for the most part with Who Goes There for the main story and throughout the rest of it, McCready tells Powell about a dream that he had. But in Who Goes There, Norris is the one who later recounts the dream that was told to him by McCready. And it is in this dream that he talks about this thing that they found being able to duplicate itself, imitate his friends and co-workers that he has there, and completely and perfectly become these other people. I dreamed that the child of nature, as Blair called it, had somehow retained a sluggish life, that it was vaguely understanding everything going on about it, all the endless infinity of black polar nights and glittering polar days through all the ages it lay there trapped. And not just that, but it could also mold its very blood and flesh and smallest cell to not merely imitate, but duplicate the flesh and blood and cells of any other thing it chose, and read thoughts, the habits, and the mind of anyone. And this terrifying nightmare that he had really gets under the skin of Powell in Frozen Hell, or Norris in Who Goes There, because the idea that this thing could perfectly imitate any one of your friends would have you asking the question of, is this really the person that I know, or is it this thing? McCready has to apologize after relaying his dream, because for him, it has been the only thing he has thought about since he had it. And he knows that this entire idea is insane, but for some reason he continuously thinks about it. And I want you to keep it in mind, because he said that not only could it perfectly imitate anything, but that it could also read minds. minds. Once again, pulling from the original story of brain stealers from Mars and taking the Thushal and combining them with the Martians who could also read minds and tell them apart, or maybe this is just the Thushal picked it up from them and then continued on to read minds wherever it went. But the idea that it could read minds is very clearly here throughout the rest of the story, and it's interesting because the more I think about it, it does make sense that that could also be happening in John Carpenter's The Thing. I mean, how else would it know all of these different plans that are going on? You can't outsmart it. It's ahead of you because it already read your mind.
Somebody got to the blood!
What?
But this is one piece to how the thing works in the original stories, and something we will have to come back to see if the rest of them do line up, but our characters might not know this is a power that it has. But with the conclusion of MacReady recounting his dream in Frozen Hell, we also have him concluding everything that happened in Who Goes There to the rest of the crew, to the point that both stories really begin to overlap at this point, with Chapter 3 of Who Goes There and Chapter 4 of Frozen Hell, both starting with them trying to convince Conet that he needs to stay up and watch this thing without anybody around and just be completely alone with it. It's nothing to worry about, completely safe. The thing is dead. We assure you that it is. Maybe. But before we go into depth on exactly what that means, Kenner is just too upset with every single person here because they keep bringing all of their stuff and putting it on his one big table in the kitchen, and he does not want this thing in his kitchen, and he definitely doesn't want it anywhere near any of the stuff he cooks with. Luckily though, Commander Gary is here and he's able to get everybody to chill out for a moment and let Blair explain a little bit more about this thing and how they shouldn't have to worry about it, because it's not like, you know, the fish that jump up into the water and then they get frozen in place, and then when the water thaws, they're able to swim away and come back to life. And just the mention of this sends Conet over the edge as he says, "Are you telling me right now this thing could come back to life?" Conet is extra done with all of this. He doesn't care. No, just the idea that it could come back to life scares him so bad. He doesn't know what to do. Blair calls him a fool because he didn't even let him finish what he was trying to say, that those are low life forms that are able to be thawed and come back to life. This is clearly not a low life form. It is a higher life form, and it cannot be frozen and then brought back just by being thawed. But he believes that if it's thawed correctly, that some of the cells still might display the characteristics that they did in life. And then he tries to remind everyone that even the muscle cells continue to live a few hours after somebody has died, and even their fingernails continue to grow. But with that, you're not going to go around just screaming zombie. All he wants to know is a little bit about where it's from, how the body and how the cells work within this being, and he's hoping that if it's thawed properly, he will be able to learn something about it. And it's at this point that Blair, Norris, and Conet get into a huge argument over different aspects of the thing, whether it could be carrying some sort of disease that man has never dealt with before and it could end all of them, or that the thing could just be purely evil and the stuff that it considered normal and appropriate for whatever planet it's from is what they would equate to strangling kittens. All of their argument is cut off again by Kenner chiming in saying, "Just get this thing off of my table and also cover it up. It looks indecent since it's not wearing any clothes." This line causes Conet to start making fun of Kenner, and then Kenner just throws everything that he's been complaining about this whole time back in his face, to the point that they go, and they all set off for the night, with the thing making its way to the Cosmic Ray Lab, where Conet has to watch over it by himself as it begins to thaw out for that night. Now, it's from this point on that everything in Frozen Hell and who goes there basically lines up perfectly word for word through the rest of the book, except for a few characters' names being swapped around. And because of that, with this whole next section only being about Conet and the evening that he has to watch over the thing, we can go ahead and cover the rest of the characters that have not yet been introduced, so I can continue to use this board for stuff other than this. It's pretty straightforward. We just have people like Clark, who is the dog man. The dogs haven't been introduced yet, so he hasn't really been around. Dwight is literally just Clark. They renamed him from Frozen Hell over to Who Goes There. We have Benning, who is the mechanic. We have Pomeroy, who is the cowman. Yes, there are cows out here on the base. That's how they're able to live and continue to eat. We have Rawson, who is the sledge keep, and it is both Rawson in one story and Rawson in the other story. Because they sound so similar, I can only assume that somebody said Rawson and heard Rawson and went from there, because you probably can't even tell there's a difference between what I'm saying. But there are some other characters with Caldwell and Harvey who I don't remember what they are, because they are such a minor part in the story overall that it doesn't matter. What does matter is Conet. Conet and the Thing, which they for some reason were also calling Scarecrow for a few lines in the last chapter, and as far as I can tell, never again. Or better yet, the Frozen Thing, or the Frozen Scarecrow, because it is still frozen even though it has been 18 hours that it has been thawing within Conet's office, which is called the Cosmic Ray office, where he also has some Geiger counters that keep going off as this thing is thawing over in the corner. And it's at one of these clicks that he drops his pen, gets down to get it, and then sees the thing in the corner, just slowly dripping away as the ice is melting off of it, that he has to get him a cigarette. But for some reason, he can't get his lighter to work. Eventually retrieving his pen and getting up to get a coal from the stove to light a cigarette, he walks over to the thing and has this overwhelming sense that he needs to set it on fire. Conet felt an unreasoning desire to pour the contents of the lab's reservoir over the thing in its box and drop the cigarette into it. The three red eyes glared up at him sightlessly, the ruby eyeballs reflecting murky, smoky rays of light. He realized vaguely that he had been looking at them a very long time, even vaguely understood that they were no longer sightless. It's through all of this that he gets the chills at the entire thought of it being a living frozen scarecrow thing, so he goes back to work, just ignores everything that is going on, to the point that he is so focused on writing out all of his cosmic ray findings that he doesn't hear the floor creak. There's something slowly making its way closer and closer to him from behind, but he is too focused on writing out all of his data for the week that, again, he does not hear the floor creaking as something is walking up behind him. The next thing that we read is Conet running in, standing over Blair, to try to wake him, to tell him that this thing that he was left with is gone. It is gone. It's no longer there. This causes everyone in the bunks around to freak out, including Van Wall, who wakes up saying, "What do you mean it's gone?" Causing everyone else to come running, being like, "What happened? Conet, what did you do?" And it turns out that he fell asleep for around 20 minutes, and when he woke up, it was no longer there. All of this confusion has Copper realizing that, oh yeah, this thing is not from Earth, therefore all of our earthly laws just don't apply to it. And Conet somehow is able to make a joke in this moment where he says, yeah, well, the laws don't apply to it, but it did apply for a leave of absence and then head out. Luckily, it didn't eat me before it did. When Blair chimes in and says, well, maybe we better find it. Now, it's at this point that everyone's already losing their mind at the fact that this thing that was supposed to be dead is now just out and about walking around, and they're wondering if maybe Conan is playing a joke or if he carried it off, and he reassures them that he definitely didn't, but they still have this question in the back of their minds with Norris coming out and MacReady coming out and even Commander Gary, until they hear the dogs going berserk down the hall. And the first one to actually make a move is Conan. As he runs over, he grabs a 45, he grabs an ice axe and makes his way to Dogtown. And when he gets there, he stands in the doorway, blocking everyone else because he is a big dude. And he pulls out the 45, yelling, "Great God," and begins to fire to the point that he throws it on the ground and holds up the ice axe in a defensive position. And it's as he stands blocking the pathway that MacReady and Barclay come running up behind him, just in time for Barclay to catch a glimpse of whatever is going on inside there, that it freezes him in his tracks as that thing leaps for Conet, who is ready and swings for it, hitting it right in what could be described as its head, sending it flying backwards to where the dogs are then ready to attack, and they jump all over it. But it's not going down that easy. Even being ripped by all of the dogs, it gets up ready for a fight, but Barclay comes in with the fire extinguisher, able to spray it, causing it to be even more confused as it's still getting nipped at by all of the dogs that they have, allowing for MacReady to now come in with one of the blowtorches that they use to heat the planes of the engine and begin spraying it with all of the dogs, slowly trying to get back away from this 3-foot flame that he has, leading to the super cool moment since MacReady's able to keep it back with the blowtorch, as he then tells Barclay to run and get some power, because electricity is what they're actually going to use to kill this thing. The axe did a little bit of damage, the fire extinguisher at least allowed them to have a moment, and the blowtorch is keeping it back, but electricity is the one thing that they are going to rely on to kill every single one of the cells within this thing. But it's not just Barclay that is on with this plan, it's also Van Wall and Norris that have already ran up there to the power room out in front of him, or Dutton in Frozen Hell, but nobody cares about him because he got cut out and replaced by Norris. But they end up making a very long stick that they have attached each phase of the wires to the end of it, so they can sit there and jab the thing with a full 220 volts of power, which would hurt extremely bad. And they don't just do it for a little jab here and there, they walk over and just and hold it on there for minutes until they are sure that this thing is completely dead. It's after this that a meeting is held for everyone to discuss what to do now, because crazy stuff is going on. But the saddest news by far is that Charnock, who is their lead dog of all of their teams that they have, is hurt so badly after this encounter that he will not be leading out any more teams. And this seems to upset everyone, leading Gary to ask Blair if the thing really is dead, or if they need to continue to shock it even longer. But Blair assures them that it is dead, but his question is, was what we saw, or did we ever see, its true natural form, or was the form that was in the ice just it imitating the beings that ran the ship and it invaded that ship? Which is a good question and something I wondered about in my first video of trying to figure out if the being that was on the ship caused the crash because it was imitating the beings that ran the ship, or if something just went wrong and it crashed, landed on Earth by accident. Both seem really plausible to me, but Blair believes what they saw in the ice was its true form. And this is something that is extremely important because Blair believes blah, 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 and Copper does the same thing of saying, well, according to natural law, this is how the thing should work, for both of them to be proven wrong multiple times throughout the story. All they can do at this time is slowly present ideas and theorize on how and why the thing does what it does until they make their way through the story and still get to the end wondering on what they got right and what they got wrong, because the entire time, this is one big guessing game for them. With all that said, I'll just put a maybe. Maybe they saw its natural form in the ice, but what they do know is that it changed from its natural form to something much more beast-like when it was being attacked by the dogs and by Barclay and them. I have a correction to make. Charnock did not make it. He was half digested by the thing during the entire encounter. Because when Blair begins to describe what they found afterwards and what he has been studying since, is that it was half Charnock and half of the original thing that they had seen and found in the ice. But the thing had like melted down into this jelly-like protoplasm that was consuming Charnock to slowly become Charnock. And it's at this point that Blair explains the most important part of this story. That as this thing is melting down into protoplasm to consume Charnock, it is slowly analyzing every single one of Charnock's cells, to the point that it is able to analyze each cell down to the nucleus level, which is where they had killed it at, so that way Blair could still tell the difference between the real Charnock cells and the thing cells that were imitating Charnock cells.
It's not dog. It's imitation.
The problem is, if it was given enough time to complete this process, there would be no possible way for them to tell the difference between the thing and Charnock, because it would become a perfect imitation of Charnock down to a completely cellular level, causing McCready to ask if it did have enough time, what would have happened? And Blair just flat out tells him it would have been a dog. We would have just accepted it as a dog. The other dogs would have believed it was a dog. There would have been no question, because this race of aliens, this race of this thing, is so vastly intelligent that it understands all of life on such a very small scale that it can replicate and change at will. It's through this that Barclay asks the question of what was its plan, and Blair makes it obvious that it was probably here just to take over the entire planet, and there would be no way for anyone to tell anything apart, and eventually we would all just be one of the things. Its new natural form for all of us would just be the same, but an imitation of what we really are. But it's so perfect of an imitation that we would never know the difference. But then everybody asks, but how? How would it do that? Would it just reproduce with itself until it has enough to imitate everyone and take over? And this is when a bomb is dropped on everyone, and something that we need to remember for the rest of these stories. Blair shook his head and gulped. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to reproduce. It weighed 85 pounds. Charnock weighed about 90. It would have become Charnock and had 85 pounds left to become, Jack, for instance, or Chinook. It can imitate anything. That is, it can become anything. If it had reached the Antarctic Sea, it would have become a seal, maybe two seals. They might have been attacked by a killer whale, become either killers or a herd of seals, or maybe it would have been caught by an albatross or a gull and then flown to South America. The point is that it would always still have its original bulk, the original one, its natural form that started everything, left over to start again with any of the process. But it doesn't really have to, because if it was a seal and it gets eaten by a killer whale, it just becomes the killer whale. It doesn't have any natural enemies, because anything that would eat it or kill it, it can just become that thing until it's at the complete top of the food chain and take over the rest of everything. After this, Copper and Gary are just seriously wondering, is it still alive or is this over? But Blair reassures everyone that even after they all left, He continued to stay there for minutes, electrocuting it to ensure that it was no longer alive. And Copper says, well, good thing is that we're in Antarctica where even if it was alive, it wouldn't have anything else to imitate because there's nothing out here. And Blair begins to really lose it and starts giggling to himself, saying it didn't know yet that the ones it needed to imitate was not the dogs. It hadn't learned that we were the ones it needed to imitate because we are the only ones that are here that could get it away from this place. It's with this that Blair begins to admit that he is Pandora. He opened the box, but he is also trying to keep it closed because he went out and smashed all of the plane equipment so nothing can fly, nothing is going to leave here, and then he falls out on the floor, laughing hysterically, causing everyone else to lose their mind, and Van Wall, who is the chief pilot, to run out to his planes and his helicopters and everything else to see if he is lying or not, and all anybody else can do is stand and watch except for Dr. Copper, who goes and gets a needle and injects Blair so he can just sleep and no longer be scaring everyone with his crazy, insane ranting. But the problem is everything that he is saying is not just going to go on deaf ears. All of this is going to stick with them through the rest of the night. Blair is fading in and out of it. They move him onto a bed. Van Wall has checked the planes, and sure enough, everything is destroyed. They are not leaving. And McCready and Copper are talking about everything that he just said, and Copper points out that Blair missed something. Because if the thing became this perfect imitation of, say, a dog, if it didn't have its own nucleus somewhere, then it would just be a dog and no longer be able to change. Instead, it is just this perfect imitation with its own nucleus that is covered up to make it look like it is that thing, but it can still change and form into something else. Which means from his standpoint that they should be able to come up with a serum test to see between who is real and who could potentially be a thing. Copper explains how this whole blood test will work later on, but he is fairly certain that this will be the key that they need to tell the difference between what is and isn't real. And it's at this moment that Blair sits up in the bed and begins asking where Conet is. As Conet then walks over to Blair and says, "Here I am, what do you want?" And Blair looks at him and says, "Are you?" Conet's just like, "Blair, what are you talking about?" And Blair says, "Are you there? Are you Conet? The thing wanted to be a man, but it became a dog." Now, with Blair being taken care of by Dr. Copper, he's no longer an issue, but they are all certain that there is nothing they will be able to do to convince Blair that the rest of everybody else there at Big Magnet is human. And it's here that Norris then chimes in, saying that it's going to be tough to convince him as well, and blames McCready because of his dream, leading McCready to explain to Copper and Gary that he had a dream before anything had happened, that the thing that they found in the ice could imitate any living being. But it's Norris that chimes in, saying not only could it imitate other beings, but it could also read minds, read thoughts, read ideas, mimic mannerisms and everything, to where it is such a perfect imitation that you would not be able to tell the difference. All of this has Copper wondering why they're so focused on this in the first place, because all of this is just speculation from a dream, when they have a literal madman that is most likely going to believe all of them are aliens when he wakes up, and they have to deal with him. This is something that is real right in front of them. But it's McCready that responds, saying that they all know Conet is really Conet. He is not one of those things, because that doesn't make sense. Because this thing has an unhuman mind. It's not from Earth, and it's not going to think the way that Conet does. It's not going to understand the way that he walks and the way that he moves. It's not going to talk in the same way that he would. It's not going to react. It is only going to look like Conet because it is not human and does not have a human mind. But then he follows this up by saying there's no way that something from another planet could show up, take over one of their friends that they have been stuck with for months on end, day in, day out, or around him all the time. They know him better than he knows himself. How in the world could this thing step in and take his place without them knowing? To MacReady, there is no way, and therefore Conet must be Conet and not a thing. Only to Dr. Copper, this is a problem, because for this thing to only look like what it is imitating would nearly defeat the entire purpose of it being able to blend in and take over the rest of the other things it's looking to imitate, causing Conet again to be in question as Copper explains his point of view that MacReady is right. It is unhuman, and it has this unhuman ability to act like anything that it needs to in order to fit in. The same way that a good actor can go through and imitate somebody that it has studied and watched for a long time and convince the majority of people that they are in fact that person they are portraying. But Copper does agree that even a good actor would not be able to convince all of them that they are in fact this other person there within the camp because of how much time they have all spent together in Antarctica. That would take a supernatural skill, or you might even say otherworldly or alien. There's a bunch of other words that you could put here over supernatural for the type of skill that would be required to make a perfect imitation of Conet that would trick anyone. Only that's not quite right, because there is one person that would know if they are human or the thing, and that's Conet himself, who just stepped into the room and is hearing this conversation that is going on between MacReady, Norris, Copper, and Gary. And of course, he doesn't like being talked about in this way or just being seen as a specimen that they get to dissect, but MacReady points out he's got the one thing that they don't, and that's that he knows what the answer is, whether he is human and he is the real Conet, or if he is this thing. He is the only one that knows, and until they find a way to tell, he will remain the most feared man in Big Magnet. All of this doesn't make Conet feel any better, especially with how everyone keeps staring at him, to the point that he says he wishes everyone else could see their eyes and the way that they stare. I say this because it continuously comes back up throughout the rest of the story with how everyone continues to look at one another. And to emphasize it even more, we have Benning, who is watching all of this happen, holding an ice axe the entire time, and when Conet calls him out for it, he throws it down and then immediately picks it back up and continues to look nervously around the room at everyone that is there, not knowing who is what or exactly what they're going to do next. Because they need a test, and Blair was right that microscopic examination is just not going to work with how this thing works. But a serum test would do the trick. Now I know what you're thinking, this looks extremely goofy, but this is a real test that they have done, but this is a very dumbed down version of how it works. Basically, for what Dr. Copper explains to the rest of them there is that if you were to take human blood, inject it into a rabbit, it is poison to the rabbit. It's not good for it. But if you continue to do this over a period of time with a bunch of blood going into the rabbit, eventually the rabbit's immune system would kick in and it would become human immune, allowing you to then draw blood from this human immune rabbit and test human blood to see if it has a reaction. And if it does, you would know for a fact that the blood that was tested with the rabbit blood during the serum test was human and not something else. Basically giving them a definitive test to find out whether or not the blood from whoever they take it from within the base is human or is something else. Or at least that's how it works in theory, because if the thing is able to perfectly imitate something else on such a cellular level, why would the perfect imitation of human blood not also just be a part of the immunity within the rabbit? But it doesn't matter because they don't have any rabbits there in Antarctica. But what they do have are dogs, to where they can at least run this experiment with an animal. But the issue is dogs are much bigger than rabbits, so it's going to not only take more blood for this process to start, it is also going to take more time. More time that they most likely don't have. So there's issues with this plan all around, but at least there is a plan. But not only do they need a plan to figure out who is who, they still have to deal with Conet until they're able to run this test. And once again, Conet is standing there listening to this as they literally just call him out, being like, he might be human. That causes him to be upset, but Copper tells him to shut his mouth because he might also be a monster. They don't know, and they're going to treat him as being much more dangerous than Blair until they find out, and you better guarantee that they are also going to lock up Blair until he calms down. With most likely the only way that that is going to happen is by them actually running the test on everyone there and figuring out what all is going on, which means they need to get started by putting some blood into some dogs. But since they're much bigger than rabbits, they need more blood, and Copper, being the one to run all of this, agrees that he will be one of the ones to give blood, but he needs someone else to also give their blood. To which Gary steps up and says, well, I do, and Copper says, of course. But one thing's for sure, Conet will not do, because they don't know what he is, even though he continues to say, I am human. Please just hurry up with that test, and for the love of God, stop staring at me with those eyes. So Gary and Copper start the test by first getting some of their blood, and it's during this process that they talk about everything else that is going on, with Barclay and Benning having to fix up the tool shed so they can put Blair in there, and Conet just wanting to get away from everyone anyway, so he's completely fine with being isolated. But it's through talking about Blair that Copper brings up this idea that he knows Blair would also know about, of how to get rid of hoof and mouth disease in cattle. To which both Gary and Clark, because he's the dog man and he's here watching over his dogs, both say no, and Copper tells them the easiest way is to remove hoof and mouth. Anything that has hoof and mouth disease, you get rid of it, and then you won't have hoof and mouth disease. And Blair will take this exact same line of thinking to get rid of this thing by getting rid of everyone there at Big Magnet. But thinking about it, Clark does make a good point, as he says if things get too bad, it might be a good idea to just let Blair loose so he can tie up all of the loose ends there. Only Hopper reminds them that if that happens, the last man alive in Big Magnet will not be a man, because the thing's whole thing is to stay alive at all costs, taking over whatever it needs to, blending in when it needs to, imitating and getting along so it can remain alive. And it's here that Copper believes and says that he believes that maybe every little piece of it is self-sufficient, which is probably the scariest part of all of this, because he even points out that the deconite or dynamite that they have wouldn't do anything but make it worse, because then there would be a bunch of little pieces self-sufficient just everywhere. Of course, all of this is still just a bunch of theories, and the theories don't stop here as they continue the conversation, talking about being able to fly and talking about birds, where it might be from, until they are interrupted by Barclay to let them know that they have everything ready at the tool shed and Blair will not be able to get out unless someone lets him out. Which is probably not going to happen anytime soon, since he is in there talking a bunch of crazy stuff about the dreams that he has had. Dreams a lot like what MacReady had, but much worse, because Barclay reminds everyone that on the way back from Secondary Magnet, it was Blair who slept right next to the thing when they stopped on the way. So now he's in there like a loon talking about how he dreamed the thing is alive, and of course they know that it is, but he's also saying that it had telepathic powers. But not only can it read minds, but it can also broadcast its own thoughts the same way that Blair is doing now to anyone close enough to listen. With the next ones to listen being Barclay, MacReady, Dr. Copper, and Benning, who have gone out there to check on Blair and to make sure everything is situated within his shack. With Blair basically just hidden away over in the corner, not wanting any of them to come near him because he doesn't know what they are. So he tells them that the only food that he wants is sealed cans. He doesn't know if Kenner is a thing or if he's human. He doesn't care. He is going to cook his own food and it better be sealed. But not just that, he also wants everyone to stay away. He doesn't want to see anyone. He doesn't want to be around anyone because he will not be absorbed. And all of them are like, okay, that's fine. But Barclay tries to be nice saying, look, Blair, you got a lot going on. Let me just try to get your stove up and going. But before Barclay has a chance to make it 2 steps, Blair is already losing it, trying to claw his way through the shack wall to get away. So they all take the hint. They don't argue with him anymore, go outside, and immediately Blair is putting his own stuff against the door so that way nothing from outside would be able to get in without him letting them in. If only that's how the thing worked. And speaking of the thing, MacReady asked Dr. Copper how the test is going after only 30 hours and how much longer he believes that it might take to start testing everyone. And Copper says that it's probably going to be 5 days. 5 more days that they will be questioning whether or not Conet is Conet. But MacReady's been thinking quite a bit about it, and he asked if Conet were changed, would he have warned us so soon after the animal escaped? Because it really would make the most sense that if Conet is a thing, that he would let the other thing get away and go and make more things with more time so it could take over the way that it wanted to. But Copper says that this thing is selfish. Every little piece of it is all of it, and all of it is for every little piece of it. Because if Copper is right in what he said while ago, that every single piece is a whole, then that means that every little piece is all for itself. And if Conet is a piece on his own, then that means he is all for himself, and being a perfect imitation, then it would still have the same feelings and know that the real Conet would need to go and report this as soon as he realized what had happened. It's voicing it this way that really makes all of them think of how dangerous this perfect imitation really is, causing MacReady to realize what Conet was talking about with the looks everyone has and the way that their eyes are. This look that everyone else would have and would be giving everyone in between of, I wonder if they are human or not, which leads to the rule of 4, to where everyone has to not just have a buddy with them at all times from here on, but there must be 4 together at all times. 5 more days of them all being stuck together in these groups until it is 5 days, no more, and the tests are ready to where they can finally take Conet's blood and test it with the human immune dog. And it doesn't take but a second for them to all know that Conet really is Conet and that he is human. And this realization causes him to fall out on the floor just sobbing. Everyone else is so excited because that means that this thing is finally gone and done for, and they no longer have anything to worry about. And all of this is such good news that they can go and tell Blair, and Blair should recover just fine. Only there's a problem, as MacReady is the only one to notice that Copper is not celebrating. Instead, he continues to mess with the tubes, as another one begins to react the same way that Conet's blood did, causing him to go completely white and MacReady to feel like a knife has been thrusted into his chest. Copper understands what this means as he looks up to Commander Gary and tells him to come here. This gets everyone's attention as they all go silent, realizing that this is putting Conet back into question, but not just him, also Gary or Copper, because one of them that gave blood to the dog is what is causing the dog's human immune blood to also react to the thing, meaning that either Gary or Copper is a thing. Gary, tissue from the monster precipitates too. It proves nothing but the dog was monster immune too. That one of the 2 contributing blood, one of us, you and I, Gary, one of us is a monster. Hearing this causes Gary to tell MacReady to call everyone back because everything has gone wrong. So wrong, in fact, that Gary no longer believes he should be in charge. Instead, he hands it to his number 2, which is Van Wall in Frozen Hell, and you can see that he was a much bigger character and then was removed from that position for MacReady, and who goes there, making MacReady a much more of a main character than anyone else in this story. And it's just after Gary hands off the position of leader of the entire group that he says, I may be the one. I know I'm not, but I can't prove it to you in any way. And he follows this up by pointing out the fact that Dr. Copper just revealed that the test was a failure, meaning that one of them is the thing. And if he was the thing, it would make sense for him not to reveal that information, proving that Dr. Copper must be human. To which Copper says that he knows that he's human, but he also doesn't have any way to prove it. But what he knows for certain is that one of them is a liar because the test cannot lie. But can the test lie is my question, and I will answer this once we make it to the cows. And if you don't know the story, that probably sounds really confusing, but trust me, when we get there, more stuff will get more confusing. Because the confusion continues to go around as Copper points out the fact that he revealed the test not working, which seems to prove that he is human, but then Gary was the one that actually revealed that to everyone, and as the monster, he should not do that, which also proves that Gary is human. But because of that, that would mean that Copper isn't human, But if Copper isn't human, then that would also mean that Gary isn't human, but it just keeps going around and around and around in this big circular logic of who is and who isn't the thing, all because it is a perfect imitation. All of it simply proving that the thing is smart, and I would say this is an understatement for the level of knowledge that it has when it comes to this whole perfect imitation and what it needs to do. And then you throw on the fact that it is able to read minds. It's going to be one step ahead of everybody and every other thing. And this entire thing leads Copper to basically going mad as he now falls back onto one of the bunks in the room and just begins laughing hysterically, because what else are you gonna do? Luckily though for everybody, not only is MacReady now in charge, but he was also on his way to becoming Dr. MacReady before he switched to meteorology, which is why he is the one to get up and to get a needle to inject Dr. Copper to basically take him out for a little while, the same way that they did with Blair earlier. So with Dr. Copper being out of it, this leaves Dr. MacReady to now be the one to come up with tests, and his first thing that he does is test the test that Dr. Copper came up with to see if it tests properly. Because again, MacReady knows that he is human, but he doesn't have a way to prove it to anyone else. So after running the serum test on himself, he does find out that it reacts to human blood the way that it was supposed to. Which I get what he's getting at with his confidence of him being human, but again, how would I know if he was human? He can tell me he's human, but I've already seen that this test is flawed. I still don't trust you, MacReady. Dr. MacReady, or whatever your name is. But Van Wall does seem to trust Dr. MacReady, as he then asks, why would the thing just leave all of us alive? It seems to be loose. Why would it not go ahead and just destroy all of us or take us all over? And MacReady has an answer that this thing needs life forms available, and it is holding all of the other humans in reserve since it cannot reanimate a dead body. Apparently. He does throw in there apparently, so I'll give MacReady some credit that he knows his limits and that he is still theorizing at this point of how the thing works. Skinner hears this and begins spiraling because he then asks the question of would he know if he were a monster? Would he know if it had already taken over him and now he is currently one of those things? And MacReady flat out says yes. You would know, and Norris follows it up by saying, but we wouldn't. But there is something that they would know whether or not it was a monster, which is what causes MacReady to ask Clark and Van Wall to go with him to run some more tests. And it's with these tests that they finally begin to realize just how much smarter this thing is than they are. Because it's as MacReady, Van Wall, and Clark return from whatever they were doing that Conet has to run up and question them about what they just did, to where Clark just begins snickering to himself because he is also losing it. So as Clark's over there giggling to himself in the corner, we have Van Wall stating just how logical of a decision it was for the thing to just leave the immune dog alone so they could continue drawing more blood for other serum tests. But the thing is, they will not be able to make any more serum tests with any of the other dogs or use anybody else's blood because there are no more dogs. There is also no more cattle left. As Van Wall explains to everyone that they are all very nasty when they begin changing, but they are slow and the electrocution rod is very quick to put them down before they have time to change and run away or spread more. At hearing this, Kenner, who is the cook, sort of begins to freak out, but everyone else continues their conversation talking about how all of the cattle and all of the other dogs were not real. They were imitations. They were just these other things. And at this point, Kenner really freaks out. He stands up and begins screaming about the milk because he had just milked them an hour ago. And people have drank it since then. He has drank the milk since then, causing him to not hear anyone else and just go running off alone by himself without a coat into the Antarctic. It's at this point that Van Wall takes a moment thinking about what just happened with Kenner and understands that he's probably just mad like the other half of everybody else that's there. But there is the possibility that he could be one of those things and is now getting away. So he says for a few of the other guys that are standing there to go after him and bring him back. And it's as some of them head out to go and get Kenner that Norris speaks up, asking McCready, how long does he think that the cows were not real cows? McCready just shrugs because he doesn't know, but what he does know is they have a test. And he can at least go through and test it with the serum test to see if it tests as one of the things or if it really was just regular milk that was there. And sure enough, it's just normal milk, which is odd because either that means the cows were just cows when they were milked, or with them being perfect imitations, they made perfectly good milk. Which means that I now have even more questions, because if a perfect imitation of a cow makes perfectly good milk that anyone could drink without issues, what does that mean for the test that they ran earlier? Both of these have such big problems that I keep having to re-record this, and I took a whole extra day to think about it, because this just affects the story so much, and it seems like such a stupid thing. So before we get into the cow things being things beforehand, and they made perfectly good milk, we can look at this one because it's just a lot less complex. But that means all of the cows were changed within the last hour of them being milked. You saw what happened with the dogs and how they freaked out when they began to be assimilated. Which means there's all these cows that had to be changed within the last hour without them making such a ruckus that it alerts everyone to what is going on. Does that sound like it makes sense to you? Because I'm not sure. Maybe it does. Maybe it does. Maybe the thing is so quick at this point because it is getting used to the way life works on Earth that it can take over bodies much quicker. And they might not have been perfect imitations at this point, but they were good enough to trick everyone when they walked in and looked around to go, I wonder if these cows are things. And they go, oh no, they are. This is all a lot, but they would have had just plain old regular cow milk. Not a big deal. This is a problem. For the cows to have reached the point that they can produce perfectly good milk without it being signaled by the tests that they use to see if something is a thing or not, means that they would have had to have been things for long enough to become such perfect imitations that they can make this perfectly good milk. Basically, the cows have been things for a while at this point. If you were to look under everything in a microscope, they've been cows for so long, you wouldn't be able to tell a difference. There's no difference in the milk. Like, by all means, they are full-blown cows. It almost makes me thankful to be lactose intolerant, but from now on, when people offer me something with milk in it, I'll just tell them, no thanks, I don't trust the cows. Because you shouldn't. Shouldn't trust the cow. Even Google says there are no cows in this story because all of the cows are things. Now I know what you're thinking. Poulter, it's not a big deal. Even if they were things before they were milked, they went through and made perfect imitation milk that is so perfect, it's just plain old milk with no thing in it. Oh, poor naive child. I wish you understood. I don't just make these videos. You should know by now that if I am pointing out this is a huge moment in the story, there is a reason. Why don't you trust me at this point? The test they made triggers with a reaction from the antibodies of the dog against either human blood cells or the thing's blood cells. But to be specific, when they tested and got the reaction of the thing beforehand, they didn't test the thing's blood, they just took a little bitty piece of the thing and put in there and it caused the reaction. Meaning that you should be able to test a piece of human and get the same reaction, just the same way that they did with the thing. And the reason this is important is because milk is made up a lot of somatic cells. And if you want to be specific about the whole blood part of it, it does have white blood cells in milk, and that's one of the ways that cows are able to avoid infection when it comes to their whole mammary gland. The other type of cow cells that can be found in milk are epithelial cells, which are the pieces of the mammary gland within the udder that break off and go into the milk. It is how milk is made. It is all part of the process, meaning that all of the milk is a part of the cow, and if they were cow things beforehand, that should have triggered, but it didn't. So the idea that they could make perfectly good imitation milk that wouldn't trigger the test means that their entire test shouldn't work every single time. Because if you gave a thing enough time with a human body, it should be able to produce blood that would not trigger the response. Meaning that they would be able to make perfect imitation blood from a human, and the entire test from the very beginning has been doomed to fail, and they didn't know it until it was far too late. Just like so many other things that happen in this story, they come up with an idea, they try to test it out, and they don't find out until it's too late that it wasn't going to work from the very beginning. But there is good news to all of this, and it's that I'm correct. I already pointed all of this out in the first video about how McCready would be able to stand up there and test his blood with the hot needle and not get a reaction, because he is not just an imitation with his blood in the dish, but he is a perfect imitation with his blood in the dish, to the point that it doesn't react because it is now just blood.
Because it goes back to the same thing that keeps coming up over and over, that this is supposed to be a perfect imitation of you, all your organs, including all of your blood.
No blood from one of you things won't obey when it's attacked.
So what if the Mac thing is right about the other things?
After this, Mac makes the statement that we are helpless because we don't know enough, and that is such a crux in this story, because constantly they're just having to guess against a being that is so much smarter than them. They've been hopeless and helpless from the beginning. And it's through this that McCready believes he has come up with a definitive test to tell whether or not something is a thing. And that is simply to shoot it through the heart, and if it doesn't die, it is a monster. To which Gary remarks that there are no more dogs, there's no more cattle, and all the thing has left to imitate is man. Meaning that this test is going to be extremely difficult on the rest of the crew. Some time passes and they catch up with Kenner and lock him in a room because they don't know if he's a thing or if he's just gone mad. But what they do know is that he likes to sing a lot, and he is just singing a bunch of hymns to himself in the room, loud enough for everyone all the way down the hallway to be able to hear him. So much so that they're all in danger of losing their minds. But it's not just Kenner that could be a thing, it is also Gary, who has now made his way over to talk to McCready, who's leading everybody at this time, and just wants McCready to come up with a test so he can know if he is a thing or if it's copper. But if he is a thing, then that means he already does know, but being a perfect imitation of Gary, he is playing the role of not being the thing perfectly. This story's so good. And it's while MacReady and Gary are talking about where they're going to go with the whole test situation from here that Van Wall walks over and begins to talk about how it must be that the things don't have the greater number, because if they did, why would they not just go ahead and attack right now? Which, if you've seen the 82 version of the thing, you would know that MacReady also expresses the same idea in the same time that he says, I know I'm human, which is a really big part of the movie. But instead, in this story, MacReady responds to this idea as not making perfect logical sense for the way that the thing works. Because he doesn't believe that it fights. It never would have a reason to fight something. All it needs is time, and over a period of time, it would achieve its goal in taking over everything. And if it ever did fight, it is fighting because it knows it already has a backup lined up, so in case something goes wrong during the fight, it can still have a way to continue and restart the cycle. Almost like exactly what I said in the first video. That the only reason that the Blair thing would be attacking in the end is because he already knew that he had a bunch of backups just in case he did get blown into a bunch of pieces. He wouldn't have to worry about it anymore because there was already something else lined up to restart the cycle. And Van Wall adds on to this, saying that it does make more sense because if the thing already has the greater number, there's no reason for it to be revealing itself by fighting and trying to take over everyone, because all it needs to do is wait for any of the humans to become too tired, and then they just take you over while you're asleep, and you would never know. Which is just like the definition of terrifying. Do not forget that Kenner is still singing very loudly in the background of all of this, and he will continue throughout dinner when everyone eats in complete silence as they all stare down Conet, who they're still unsure of whether or not he is a thing. But you also have Dr. Copper and Gary, even though Copper is basically lost his mind at this point, but Gary's still able to just walk around, but he's trying to help. He's doing his thing. So they all decide they need to watch a movie and just drown everything else out and try not to focus on the terror that's going on all around them. Almost like what some of you do when you watch my videos, but I covered that entire thing in a different video. They then all try to decide on what movies to watch, whether the sound needs to be turned up loud enough to drown out Kenner, if they need to have the lights off. They play a little game of classifications to where they can classify somebody as human or unknown or mad. And then we have MacReady making his way over to Van Wall to remind us and anyone in between about a power the things have that causes more issues than anything else, which is mind reading, something that has not come up a lot to this point, but you begin to realize that if they can read minds, that's the reason none of their plans work, because it just takes one person having an idea of what they think needs to be done, and then the thing is already a step ahead of them before they tell anyone else because it read their mind. And that's the reason MacReady is now concerned about telling anyone his ideas or thinking about how to come up with a test to tell the difference between a thing and a human. Because if he thinks on it too much, they're already going to know his plan, and he's not sure on how much to think about it or how much to tell anyone in advance. So Van Wall points out that it would be good for him to just tell everyone his plans as soon as they come to his mind, so that way if something happens to MacReady, everyone else would then be on the same playing field as the thing and no longer having the thing a step ahead. Unless MacReady is already a thing, and that's the reason that he didn't want to say anything about whether or not he should share his plans. But if he is a thing, then he's going to be a perfect imitation of MacReady, which means that he should wonder about these kind of things, because that's how the thing works. That is the reason this is the greatest story, because you continue to think around and around about how the thing works, and you're like, oh, it works this way, but that's how a human would work because it's a perfect imitation. So that's just how a human would work, but that's how the thing would work because the thing is a perfect imitation, and and I'm not the only one overthinking everything as MacReady lays back onto his bunk and begins to do the same thing, falling into basically a trance with the only thing around him standing out being Kenner still singing until it stops, causing MacReady to call for the sound to be turned off, where everyone then realizes that Kenner has finally stopped singing. Norris speaks up saying he's probably just listening to the movie since we're playing something to keep him distracted, but MacReady thinks something else is going on. So MacReady, Barclay, and Van Wall get up to go and see what is going on with Kenner, and when they return, they have bad news that Kenner is no more. He has been stabbed in the neck with a knife from the kitchen, leading to an investigation of the new letter that has been added to their classifications of everyone there of human, unknown, madman, and now murderer. But the problem is they're wondering who it was. Blair is still locked up in the tool shed, and all of them were in the room watching the movie. Everyone was accounted for when the movie started. Harry proposes the idea that it could have been a thing somewhere else within the facility and not one of them, but MacReady doesn't think that is likely because why would it want to decrease its supply of living beings within the base? So MacReady believes that this must just be a plain old human murderer, and Norris points out that, well, with another human dead, then maybe now the things have the greater number than the humans, causing MacReady to say, we need to go test to see if Kenner was in fact human at all. So they all head off to get the electric probe to probe Kenner to see whether or not he is human. So again, MacReady, Barclay, and Van Wall get up to get everything and test whether or not Kenner was human. It turns out that he is not. Kenner is not only dead, he has been one of the things. For the entire time he has been locked in this room singing. Everyone thought he was just mad, but he has been singing songs this entire time, playing the role of a madman as one of the things. Which is why when they walk in, it springs to attack MacReady. MacReady still has the big knife that was in his neck while ago, so he slices the thing in half, causing it to fall on the ground, and Barclay jumps over there and begins to zap both sides of the Kenner thing until it is also no more. And if you'll remember from earlier, some of the logic that they had about the thing was that there was no possible way that it could act so perfectly as one of their people there on the base to convince them that it's just the same person it's always been. They would know. But here with Kenner, they begin to realize that no, they won't. There is no way to tell the difference between who is human and who is not, based off of how they act, based off of their cells, based off of any way that they could possibly test now to see who is and isn't a thing. Except for one, because they know that the person that went in and killed Kenner is human. And since they kind of did everyone a favor by revealing that Kenner was one of the things and then they were able to eliminate it, MacReady just calls for whoever did it to reveal themselves, and they can all be assured that at least he is human. As Clark then stands up and begins to try to apologize and explain that he was driving him mad. There's no way that he wasn't also going to lose his mind if Kenner continued to sing all of these songs the way that he was. Which is when everybody realizes that that does also make sense, because Clark was sitting next to the door and he would have been the only one to slip out without being noticed to make it over there and kill Kenner and make it back into the room before they realized Kenner had stopped. But the other good thing about what Clark did is it finally caused MacReady to come up with the test. And you know which one I'm talking about if you watched the last video or if you've just seen the movie. This is the blood with the hot needle test because the thing is selfish and Dr. Copper is still pretty well out of it after being drugged, and he's laying on a bunk nearby, and this is what he tries to point out to everyone, and MacReady is already headed that way. So they get everything together, they get everyone together along with the electric probes in case someone is revealed to be a thing. They can then electrocute them and kill all of the cells so they don't have to worry about that piece of the thing. And that's just the problem, is that there are many pieces of the thing at this point because it started with the original bulk, it took something over, it doubled its mass basically, and then that one was able to go on, and then another one was able to go on. And that's just the problem, is because now there are many pieces, but it started with just the one original piece that took over another one and added to its mass with the dog, but then there was that piece that was able to basically take over another dog after the other dogs consumed pieces of it, but then this original piece was also able to basically continue on and create another human that was then able to continue on and create another human, while this one's able to continue on to create another human, and this one was able to get the cow, this one was able to get the cow, this one was able to get the cow, this one was able to do this. And so you can see that there's many issues because it multiplies as it goes at this exponential rate of multiplying from the original bulk. But the point MacReady makes is that all of these new pieces that are being made each time are individuals for themselves. And he knows this because when Kenner attacked him, he cut Kenner in half, and then there were two halves of him that they then had to shock, both of them being alive and both of them now being their own separate pieces of the thing that are also, just as Dr. Copper said, selfish, and they do want to live. And with all of that, MacReady believes that if they were to take blood from anyone and apply a hot needle to it, it too would be a selfish individual, separate now from them, that would try to crawl away from a hot needle. Makes me wonder about the milk that was there earlier. Would the milk try to crawl away? Or is it just perfectly good milk since it didn't react to the test? Why in the world is this blood not just perfect blood? How does it have to be a separate individual from the other thing? Doesn't make any sense. Which is fine because there's more stuff that's fixing to happen during this whole blood test that also doesn't make sense to anyone in the story. As they then test these 6 gentlemen through the rest of the chapter to see whether or not they are human by taking some of their blood, putting it into a dish, heating up a hot needle, dipping it into it, and if it tries to crawl away, they will then know that they have been lying this entire time. Starting off with Van Wall, as MacReady heats up a platinum wire to the point that it is glowing, and he dips it into the dish, and it just goes psst and lets off a little bit of steam. Everybody's unsure of what that means, but they're pretty sure it means he's human. They do it a few more times, and they all come to the conclusion that Van Wall is in fact human. This leads to MacReady telling Barclay to give Van Wall the entire electric probe just in case Barclay turns out to be one of the things. But then they test Barclay, and he is also human. Which is good because Barclay and Van Wall have been pretty instrumental in helping MacReady throughout this entire process anyway, but it's the second that Barclay gets back his electric probe that MacReady is testing Dutton's blood, and it turns out that he is a thing. Only before Barclay has a chance to move at all, everyone else that is standing in the room attacks Dutton and beats him to death. Or at least they beat the Dutton thing until it stops moving as they all get out of the way, and then Barclay is able to electrocute it until it is officially dead. And then Barclay and Van Wall prepare for the main man MacReady as he says the famous line of, "I'm going to show you what I already know, that I too am human," as he then tests his blood and he is human. It's after this reveal that everyone takes a moment to celebrate the fact that MacReady is human. Since he is the one running this entire test and did come up with it, they're all able to kind of take a breath and smile for once. But it's as he's saying stuff about Conet that he calls Conet forward. The chapter does this weird thing of, we don't know if they tested Conet's blood and it was revealed that he is actually a thing, or if Conet realized that he is not going to make it out of this situation, and the second he goes to step forward, he reveals that he's a thing. It doesn't matter though, because there's a ton of angry men standing around in the room as they do the same thing they did with the Dutton thing and spring and beat Conet until he doesn't move anymore and then is completely electrocuted by Barclay. And it's after that that Gary spoke in a low, bitter voice saying, "Conet was one of the finest men we had here, and 5 minutes ago I would have sworn he was. God in heaven, those damnable things are more than imitation." Gary shuddered and sat back down on his bunk. And 30 seconds later, his blood shrank from the hot platinum wire. Who knows how long Gary has been a thing, but what's even crazier is when MacReady dips the wire into the blood, it lets out a little scream as he then throws it over into the stove fire as Barclay electrocutes the Gary thing who was just talking about Conet being a thing and believing all of this time that he has been human the same way that the real Gary would have done because he was such a perfect imitation. Who knows how long? A total of 14 of them are revealed to be things, including, as we know, Conet, Dutton, Gary, and Clark. The same man they would have sworn was human because he had killed Kenner, but it turns out that the Clark thing had killed the Kenner thing. Another thing that I brought up in the first video about how one of the things would attack or kill the other thing so it could continue to live because it's more perfect of an imitation than the other one is, and it can continue on and convince the rest of them that it actually is human and not one of the things because it went through and killed a thing. That's what this is. That's what happened here.
The whole reason why the Palmer thing pointed out Norris's head whenever it was trying to get away, basically saying, I'm a better version of you, and only the better version needs to survive and move on. Which then leads us up to the blood test scene where the Mac thing does the exact same thing and calls out all the other things that might still be around, saying, you're good imitation, but you're not perfect like me.
But something interesting happens here in the story between Who Goes There and Frozen Hell, because in Who Goes There, it just reveals that Clark was one of the things and skips right along into what they are currently doing to get rid of all of the leftover bodies and pieces of these things. But in Frozen Hell, we have Dr. Copper, who is revealed to be human, talking with MacReady about what the motives could have been behind one of the things killing another one of the things. And Copper's just like, I have too bad of a headache to even think about any stuff like that anymore. I said stuff that time instead of thing, because there's a lot of things in this. There was 14 of them, actually, all at one time with the rest of the crew. But it's not the rest of the crew, as they then ask the question about Blair, who they have forgot about and have not yet had a chance to go and test him. So as our main four, MacReady, Norris, Van Wall, and Barclay, head to check on Blair and to give him the test, the rest of the men stay behind to deal with the bodies of the 14 things by pouring acid on them and then burning them until there's nothing left. On the way, they discuss whether or not Blair is human or a thing, because they know with what happened with Kenner that the thing could imitate him as being mad the way that he was. So there's no way of telling until they give him this test on whether he's human or not. And it's as they're walking up to his shack that Barclay begins to call out for him. But MacReady quickly tells him to stop that, because regardless if he's a thing or not, with the way Blair has been acting, them showing up is most likely going to cause him to run away. And so they just need to walk up there, open the door, and go in to give him the test without him knowing that they're there. But then the question becomes, if Blair is a thing, does he have the same stamina as a man, or would he be able to run away from them across the Antarctic without any tractors or without any planes or any other way to do that other than walking? And everyone agrees that even if they gave him a broken leg, it wouldn't stop him for a minute if he was the thing. But something does stop them as they look up and see a big albatross flying overhead. And without wasting a moment, Norris reaches in under his coat, pulls out a gun, and begins blasting at it. But he doesn't kill it. Instead, all they see are some feathers that fall to the ground as it begins to fly away. But something else catches their attention as they hear the sound of tinkering and tools being moved around within the shack, where they walk up and begin to undo everything that they had done to keep the door shut. But luckily, they had left a little gap in the door so they could try to give Blair food, which he didn't want. But it's that MacReady uses to look in and see that it's not Blair. But all of them are able to see exactly what it is as they burst the door down, and this thing jumps up with its 4 tentacle-like arms, with each having 7 tentacle-like fingers on its tentacle-like hands. But before anyone's able to do anything, Norris has already fired the gun another 3 times, shooting this thing, and then he shoots it another 3 times in each one of its eyes, causing it, I guess, to not be able to see when he throws the gun right at its dumb-looking face. So as it screams out in hate, it tries to retaliate, but because it's blind, it's just having to reach, and it is not able to see Barclay with an ice axe as he slams it up against its head. And again, the unkillable monster went down. The tentacles lashed out, and suddenly Barclay fell to his feet in grip of a living, livid rope. The rope dissolved as he held it, becoming a white-hot band that burned the flesh of his hands like a living fire. Frantically, he tore the stuff from him, held his hands where they could not be reached. The blind thing felt and ripped at the tough, heavy, windproof cloth, seeking flesh it could convert. And it's here that MacReady steps in with the blowtorch and begins to blast it with the fire, driving it out of the shack into the snow. And at this point, every time it reaches back trying to crawl away from the fire, it touches the cold Antarctic snow, also causing it to want to retreat and go towards the heat, leading to this conflicting back and forth of hot and cold as it is driven farther and farther away from the shack as MacReady continues to burn it and burn it and burn it until it is no more. Or at least that's what we're told as MacReady returns to the shack and is asked by Barclay if it's split. And he says it didn't have time to. It was too busy being burned. When I left it, it was just a coal on the ground. MacReady also asked Barclay the question if there was any more left in the shack, and Barclay just says, nope, that was it. There is no more. So with the thing completely gone, they have a chance to look around Blair's shack to see what the Blair thing has been up to for the last 6 days completely alone. With just what he was able to gather from there at the base by tearing different pieces of equipment apart, he was able to create an atomic power engine that was powering an entire anti-gravity machine small enough to strap to him to jump wherever he wanted on the planet. Which is all terrifying, but what I find odd is MacReady then also begins to answer questions that nobody asked. Because the atomic power generator has it over 120 degrees within the shack, and MacReady believes that that means this being came from a hotter planet that circled a hotter sun than Earth. As he then also says that it is certain they crash landed here on accident and there will absolutely be no more things coming to Earth. Nobody has to worry about any more things ever. Trust MacReady, there's no reason to worry. But don't think about that, because Barclay is trying out the anti-gravity machine and it's super cool as he just puts it on, but the straps are kind of messed up and he's able to jump all the way across the room simply by doing this. This is when they realize that that is what the thing was working on when they had walked up to the shack. It was trying to get the straps all adjusted so it could walk outside and just jump wherever it wanted to on the planet. Given another 30 minutes, it would have been able to step outside and taken over the rest of the world. Which causes them to wonder about the albatross. Now, in Who Goes There, it is MacReady that asks about the albatross and if anyone else believes that that could have been one of those things. And it's Norris that answers, saying there would be no point. It was almost finished making its anti-gravity. Why would it need to consume something else when it was about to make the jump and end the planet? But in Frozen Hell, it is Norris that asks the question, and MacReady responds saying, no, he was almost done. There's no way. There's no point. No, by the grace of God, who evidently does hear very well, even down here, the margin of half an hour, we keep our world and the planets of the system too. Anti-gravity, and atomic power. Because they came from another sun, a star beyond the stars. They came from another world with a bluer sun. So I know that was a lot, and if this is your first time hearing this story, I'll just let you take it in because it is incredible. But it is from this story that we can find all different themes that carry on throughout the rest of the Thing universe, as well as understand the Thing itself much better in the way that it works. An easy one being that it is a perfect imitation of whatever it is it's trying to take over.
If I was an imitation, a perfect imitation, how would you know if it was really me?
As well as it being much smarter than man, as we see in John Carpenter's version of the film, that Blair was able to build a spaceship just out of parts from helicopters and the tractors and the generator, that he would have then been able to fly over to anywhere else in the world and begin the takeover. But another one that does come up in Carpenter's film is that it doesn't fight, because MacReady himself points out that the plan and the goal of the Thing is to just freeze and wait to be rescued again. So while those three are fairly straightforward, we have some other ones that I pointed out in the video about such things as them being wrong at different parts. They believe something is going to happen, but they don't really know how the Thing works, and they are in fact just taking a guess and hoping they're right.
This theory is coming from the helicopter pilot,
as well as having things that are willing to kill other things in order to convince everyone that they are in fact human, or just to stay alive a little longer. As well as the whole idea that something can be so perfect that it doesn't respond the way they believe it will respond, because it is in fact such a perfect imitation of that thing, such as with the milk versus with the blood, as I pointed out in the first video during the whole blood scene. But then in this story, we have some failed tests that happen because they do multiple versions of the test that kind of pops up in the other versions, but it's more like the tests were sabotaged instead of they were able to do the test and then realize that it failed afterwards. The same thing with the mind reading. This one here is an odd case because go back and watch any of the movies and ask the question, can the thing read minds? I say that because there are many moments that I would just attribute to the thing being much smarter than everyone else, but then there are certain moments where the thing seems to know more than what it should. For example, when the blood bank is sabotaged before they were able to do the test that Dr. Copper had come up with by testing the blood they had in the bags versus the blood that is now in them to see whether or not they are still human or if they are one of the things, that doesn't come up until the moment just before they realize the blood bank has already been sabotaged.
That test have worked, Doc?
Oh, I think so, yes. Somebody else sure thought so.
Which is why you could think, oh, well, the thing is just really smart, and it would have sabotaged it to make sure that that wasn't able to be tested across one another. But if you believe that Carpenter is putting in these mind-reading moments without any of the characters being able to realize it because they weren't there when the thing was dug up in the Antarctic to have the dreams or any of the other stuff like here and Who Goes There, then nobody knows that the creature has this ability and it's just been there the whole time. Basically, as we move forward throughout the rest of the Thing franchise, we need to keep all of this stuff in mind to see if there are moments that all of these from the original story are playing a role in the new story and are just very subtle because of the way that the story had been rewritten, such as with the whole mind reading thing and them not having the dream situation. And if you're seeing this, this means that I am going to have multiple parts to this new series of covering everything The Thing, to answer the question of what happened at the end of this movie, to figure out what is going on with the canon between the games, the comics, and the 2011 version, to see what John Carpenter has said over the years about the 82 version and how the thing works. But so far we've covered Brain Stealers from Mars, Frozen Hell, Who Goes There, and the 1976 comic adaptation of Who Goes There in Starstream number 1, and the only thing left leading all the way up to John Carpenter's film is the 1951 adaptation of the story with The Thing from Another World. And this is the part of the video that I was going to go into some detail about the movie because it's just a lot different from Who Goes There. Like, The Thing is vastly different than what we just went over. I say all of this to leave it up to you to let me know how much detail do you want me to go into on the 1951 version of The Thing, because The Thing itself is not a shapeshifter in the movie, so the whole paranoia aspect is left out of the film when it comes to that part of it, but it does pull from the original story with Brain Stealers from Mars since it is plant-based. And all of that is not to mention just how influential it is to many, many other stories after it. Because since this video has now turned into a multi-part series covering everything The Thing, I mean, I might as well go into as much detail as possible on everything. Because my entire plan for this video has just gone out the window. What I thought was going to happen is this would be a 3 to 4 hour video starting with Brain Stealers from Mars and going all the way through not just the 51 version, but the 2011 prequel, the video game, the comics, and all of the side stories that I have. But now this video is this long, and and I still have so much to cover. This is going to be a multi-part series at this point. There's just no way. I've been recording this video for days on end now, even during the day. Normally I only record at night. I have been recording during the day and at night, trying to get through everything. So a lot more of the thing will be coming your way. And all I'm hoping right now is that somebody made it to this point in the video, and that everyone that did enjoyed the way that I had to do this one, since I was covering a book instead of covering a movie or a TV show. And if you did make it here, thank you so much. That's crazy that you made it all the way to the end of this video as well. And I'm sure the rest of the Thing videos in this series will also be pretty long, because I'll be honest, I feel like I am kind of taking a chance at doing a video in this way, since this is not how I normally do stuff. But I'm hoping it was worth it. I hope you had a good time. I did. I think this story is incredible. I think the Thing is amazing, and I think it is worth it to analyze a story in this much depth, because of how enjoyable the story is to me, and I hope that you enjoyed it as well. And if you're one of the people that enjoys really, really long videos, my plan is to edit all of these in the series together into one massive project for the second channel when we make it all the way through everything that is the Thing. I'm taking a guess now, and I'm gonna say that that video will be around 18 hours long. And I know what you're thinking, huh? What do you mean? And it's because the video game, the entire playthrough that will be on the second channel, would also be in that video as well. Seriously though, if you're still here listening to me after all of this time, I thank you so much. You're incredible. I really do hope that you have an extra blessed day. And if you want to check out any of the stuff that I covered in this video, it's all down in the description, as well as the new merch is down there. And actually this shirt, the link to this cool shirt that I got from Thomas Thorogood's brother, is all linked down there too. He reached out and said, hey man, I want to send you a shirt, and I thought that was awesome. And I love this shirt because it also references one of my favorite chapters in all of the Bible. So be sure to check that out. Be sure to check out Thomas's channel, and also remember to go and check out Logan Bruno's Instagram so you can see all of his incredible work, because he saw the picture and even sent me this. And this is just the funniest thing, because this is exactly how I have felt for the last week with making this whole project. So thank you, Logan. And if there's anybody else that has some cool fan art, please feel free to send it to me over on Instagram. I would love to check out whatever you've made for me, or whatever you've made of me. And of course, I can't forget to thank all of the channel members that helped to make all of this possible, since I had to buy so much stuff to cover everything that is the Thing. There is a lot of stuff that has to do with the Thing, which is why I've started to post a separate version of every video that I make, so that way people don't have to deal with ads or any of the sponsor segments or any of the extra stuff. You can just get in, get the full story, and not have any interruptions along the way. So seriously, thanks to all of you, and thank you for watching this video, and I hope that you know that if we're ever stranded off in Antarctica, that you can trust me and know that I am human, even though I don't really have a way to prove it. Just trust me, take my hand, have an extra blessed day, and I'll see you in the next one.